quietly what was going on, and the senior deputy launched into a version that emphasized disrespect and noncompliance. And the sergeant listened, then turned to the twins and asked their names, and Malcolm answered, and the sergeant's eyes flickered just for a heartbeat, because the name had crossed his desk once attached to a commendation letter routed through channels above his pay grade. And he asked for IDs, and Marcus nodded, and the sergeant himself retrieved them carefully. And when he opened the wallet, the third twist detonated without a sound, because the ID inside wasn't a driver's license at all but a federal credentials card with an eagle most people only see from a distance, and beneath it a military ID with a rank that didn't match the night. And the sergeant's face changed, and he said nothing at first because professionals process before they react, and he handed the wallet back and asked, voice steady, if there was anything else he should know, and Marcus said, there was, but that it would be better discussed without an audience. And the senior deputy scoffed until the sergeant told him to uncuff them, and the scoff died on the vine and cuffs came off, and the twins rolled their wrists once, habit, and the sergeant suggested they step aside. And there, under a streetlight humming like an insect, Marcus and Malcolm finally spoke plainly. Not loudly, not arrogantly, but clearly, explaining who they were in the vaguest terms necessary. That one served as a captain in a joint task force coordinating federal operations across state lines, that the other commanded a SEAL team currently forward deployed, that they were on approved leave, that they had complied at every step, and that the conduct they experienced would be documented. And the sergeant swallowed and nodded because he understood consequences, and the senior deputy sputtered because he did not, and he demanded proof. And Malcolm said proof existed in databases the deputy couldn't access, but if he insisted, he could make a call, and the call would not be good for anyone who had let ego override policy. And the sergeant intervened, telling the deputy to stand down, and the crowd leaned closer now, sensing a shift, and the lawyer stepped up again, offering her card to the twins, and they thanked her, and the sergeant apologized, a real one, not a performance, and offered to comp the night, and Marcus declined, because this wasn't about drinks, and the twins asked for names and badge numbers, and the sergeant provided them. And then the fourth twist cut deeper, because a black SUV rolled to a stop at the end of the block, unmarked but unmistakable, and two men stepped out whose posture matched the twins like reflections in glass, and one spoke into an earpiece while scanning rooftops, and the senior deputy's face went pale, because even without insignia, experience recognizes experience, and the men approached, nodded to Marcus, addressed him by rank, and asked if everything was under control, and Marcus said it was now, and the men stood by anyway, because duty doesn't clock out, and phones came out among the crowd, and whispers spread, and the sergeant realized this moment would echo beyond the night, and he did the only thing left to do. He ordered a full incident report, requested body cam footage preservation, and relieved the senior deputy of duty pending review, and the deputy protested loudly, citing procedure, and Malcolm listened, then said quietly that procedure protects everyone when followed, and that tonight it hadn't been, and the deputy fell silent, and the twins turned to leave. But before they did, Marcus looked back at the bar where they'd been just two men an hour earlier and said, not unkindly, that respect was not a favor and restraint was not weakness. And then they walked away flanked by shadows that moved like guardians, and the city exhaled, and the story might have ended there if not for the fifth twist that came days later, because the incident report triggered an internal review that unearthed patterns, complaints buried and ignored, body cam footage that told a truer story than words, and a civil rights investigation opened, and the lawyer filed suit and depositions followed, and the senior deputy resigned, and the sergeant testified honestly, and the twins were asked to speak, and they did, not as victims seeking revenge but as leaders demanding accountability. And the media caught wind, and headlines ran, and talking heads argued, and through it all Marcus and Malcolm stayed quiet, because the work mattered more than the noise. And then a video surfaced of the moment the cuffs came out and the calm didn't break, and it went viral, and people saw themselves in it, fear and dignity locked together, and donations poured into a legal fund, and policy changes were proposed, and training mandates followed, and a bar on Port Harbor added a plaque that said simply, respect is not optional. And months later, on another quiet night, the twins returned to the city, not to celebrate but to close a loop, and they met the sergeant for coffee, and he thanked them for not turning a bad night into a worse one. And Malcolm said leadership was choosing outcomes, and Marcus said strength was knowing when not to use it. And as they parted, the city felt a little different, not fixed, not healed, but nudged toward better by the collision of arrogance and accountability. And somewhere a young officer watched the video again and thought twice, And somewhere a young black kid saw the twins stand calm under pressure and imagined a future with choices, and the lesson lingered like the last note of a song. You never know who's sitting quietly at the end of the bar, and power doesn't always announce itself, but it always reveals character when tested. The night began like 1,000 others in the low-lit corners of Port Harbor, a coastal American city where salt air mixed with neon and every bar had a story it didn't want told, and the twins, Marcus and Malcolm Reed, sat shoulder to shoulder at the far end of the bar nursing dark bottles and quieter thoughts, their faces mirror images framed by close-cropped hair and the kind of calm that came from long years of discipline rather than comfort. And nobody there knew that one of them commanded a U.S. Navy SEAL team with a combat record buried under layers of classification, while the other wore captain's bars in a federal special operations task force that answered to people most cops only saw on TV. Because tonight they weren't commanders or captains. They were just two black men on leave, dressed plain, speaking softly, celebrating nothing more than being alive together after years of rotating deployments that kept them apart. And that anonymity might have lasted if not for a spilled drink and a deputy with something to prove, because when the elbow-knocked glass and whiskey bled across the counter, the bartender waved it off but the deputy didn't. He squared his shoulders, let his hand rest too long near his holster, and asked whose fault it was in a tone that wasn't a question. And Marcus answered with an apology that was sincere and brief, which somehow made it worse, because the deputy's partner laughed and said something about "watch your hands." And the room's temperature changed as other patrons looked away, and Malcolm felt the familiar internal switch flip, the one trained to catalog exits, angles, and the weight of human intent. Yet he stayed still, because restraint was a weapon too, and the deputies leaned in closer, their voices louder, their words sharper, talking about IDs and back outside and acting smart. And when Malcolm asked calmly why there was a problem if the bartender had said it was fine, the answer came with a threat wrapped in a smile, and a third officer appeared as if summoned by the tension itself. Radios crackling, authority stacking on authority, and the twins exchanged a look that said everything without a word, because they had grown up together in a neighborhood where surviving meant reading danger early, had trained separately in pipelines that broke men on purpose, had learned the cost of ego in blood, and now found themselves in a place where history pressed down on them like a hand on the back of the neck. And the officers demanded IDs again, louder, and when Marcus reached slowly for his wallet exactly as instructed, one of them grabbed his wrist too hard, too fast, and the bar went silent as a held breath, and that was the first twist, because Marcus didn't pull away or escalate. He simply locked eyes with the man holding him and said, "You don't want to do this." Not as a threat but as a statement of fact, which made the officer bristle, and he tightened his grip, and Malcolm stood then, palms open, voice level, asking everyone to take a breath, and the deputies took that as defiance, and chairs scraped, and someone shouted for calm, and the senior deputy announced they were being detained for disorderly conduct, and cuffs came out, and time stretched thin as wire, and the twins complied because compliance buys time and time reveals character, and as metal closed around wrists trained to break it, Malcolm felt the old anger rise, not the hot kind but the cold, surgical kind, and he asked for a supervisor, and the request drew laughter, and the officers began marching them toward the door past faces that wouldn't meet theirs, and outside the night air cut sharp, and a patrol car's lights painted everything red and blue, and the senior deputy pushed Marcus against the hood a little harder than necessary. And that's when the second twist arrived quietly, because a woman stepped forward from the shadows, a lawyer who'd been at the bar meeting a client, and she announced herself and asked for badge numbers, and the officers told her to step back, and she did, but not before catching the twins' eyes and nodding once, a promise without words, and the deputies proceeded with a search that found nothing and an attitude that found plenty, and one of them muttered something about teaching a lesson, and Malcolm said, still calm, that he was invoking his right to remain silent and asking again for a supervisor, and the senior deputy sneered and said he was the supervisor on duty, and then fate, bureaucracy, and arrogance collided, because the radio crackled with a call about a disturbance 2 blocks away involving off-duty military personnel. And the senior deputy rolled his eyes and said, "Figures." And Malcolm smiled faintly, because words matter, and a passing cruiser slowed as if drawn by the gravity of the scene, and an older officer stepped out, a sergeant with lines on his face that spoke of time served rather than rank chased, and he took in the scene in one sweep, the cuffs, the posture, the crowd, the way the twins stood.